Thanks for that introduction. Let me just set up my screen sharing. All right. So we should be all set up. Don't hesitate to reach out if there's any issues. I don't see the comments in the chat right now, so I will be looking at those at the end of the presentation. So hi everybody. Actually, it's more of a good morning for me as it's 7:30 in the morning in Montreal, but I'm super thrilled to have this opportunity. So thank you to the QA Evolution Committee for having selected this talk. I don't have the opportunity to give presentations in English very often, given that my native tongue is French, so bear with me. On top of that I'm waking up. You might see me searching for some words as I'm translating live in my head. But I'm counting on you guys to make this a safe space for me. So let's get this started. So I'm gathering that if you decided to come to this talk, it's because you do want to integrate your code continuously, and that you do want to keep increasing the frequency of your deliveries to production. And of course, most importantly, with all of that, you still want to remain confident of a functioning product, therefore delivering the quality. So the main objective for this talk really is to share some metrics and best practices that were used in a previous project so that you can bring them to your team. And the whole point of it is to actually get those metrics to provoke discussions within your teams to help you improve the whole process on being confident on delivering the good scope on the good time as quickly as possible, of course. So there we have it. So of course, sure, I'm here on an international platform for a first time, but I'm making no claim at being an expert at this. I'm just here to simply share an experience that was successful, that brought about some great education for myself. And I'm also kind of here on a selfish purpose. Can't wait to hear about the metrics that you guys are diving into and what's being a success and also failing on your side, so that I can grow from that as well. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be sharing about a project that was ongoing for 2 years. I'm no longer at that company. And like most projects, nothing was perfect. But every action that we did try to do was just to get us to this goal of being confident, yet continuing to deliver quality and value to our clients as quickly as possible. The project was very microservice, so APIs, CI/CD, the whole shift left, shift right, BDD, Gherkin, Three Amigos. I'm hoping that all these words are talking to you. These were all part of our DNA to help us align on the different perspectives that everyone on the project could have. And the other important thing to know, maybe before we do start diving into this, is that the project was in the media business. So of course, if you're, testing products for military or for medical, maybe some of the findings that I'm going to be sharing today, you'll need to tweak. I mean, the degree of risk is probably not the same on our products, but I'm still hoping that I'll be able to inspire you to get some new ideas on your side of things. So my name is Julie Papineau. I'm a quality assistance coach. As you see, I love to scratch out assurance, and I'm hoping that you'll understand why by the end of the presentation, how I think we should be assisting teams and not being the police of testing everything for the team. So I'm currently working at Zentelia, and our main focus is to be able to coach and mentor companies and teams and guide them through their quality venture with best practices and a whole bunch of other toolkits on their side of things. Just quickly, so you have an idea of who I am, started off as a mainframe developer, ended up stumbling into QA around 2001. And then, of course, being from that waterfall era of, working at a bank, just deploying 2 times a year, and then stumbling into some first agile projects, and then realizing, wow, how do I adapt my job, because I can't be blitzing on the last day every 2 weeks, was making for too many overtime hours. So I had to start thinking of how do I readjust my positioning of quality within the context of an agile project? And then, of course, this last project that I'm going to be sharing about, which was really in a whole CI/CD. So now it becomes even more important to not be that bottleneck, to be able to get the value out to the customer as quickly as possible. So just a little bit of context before we really start diving in, just to make sure that we're all aligned on vocabulary and whatnot. At the start, Agile was always represented with this image. I'm sure you've seen it, you know, the ship, and we would pile on stories throughout the sprint. And then it was only at the end of the sprint did the QA teams usually end up getting the whole package and had to test everything the night before the demo the next day or stuff like that. So really, in a sense, I remember being very waterfall in an agile project, just getting everything on that last day. But now more and more companies, management and teams, well, they want to be releasing more frequently. So of course, you're recognizing the DevOps loop diagram on your screen. But sometimes we've inherited these reflexes from our past waterfall era. If I give you an example, like we're not allowed to deploy on Fridays after 2 p.m. because it's too dangerous. Or same thing with end of day. We don't deploy after 4 p.m. On our days. Actually, my question was always to the teams, well, that's kind of going against this CI/CD where we want to be delivering, you know, at any time and being confident about it. So we ended up just, you know, questioning ourselves. Why are we not confident to be deploying on, you know, after 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and whatnot? So this whole CI/CD loop is, you know, continuous integration and continuous deployment. But what I think is really important is to start considering that CA, which is continuous assurance as well. I think we need to try and find new ways of integrating quality and verification and validation as well, without being the cause of creating a bottleneck before wanting to get a release candidate out to production. So I actually propose the following image to see agility in the way of releasing in multiple times in a sprint. So here is the Zodiac. So really what our view was on this project was every time we would have a ticket that was done, we would put it on that boat and we would just, you know, zip it across into production every time. So you're probably thinking, yeah, Julie, but it's not every line of code that can bring a value or that's useful to a client in the end. But it is useful to us internally in our quality process to be able to get, you know, code out as quickly as possible instead of waiting for that huge big chunk in the end and then wondering, oh, there's an issue, but is it the line that we coded, you know, so many weeks ago, or is it, you know, the changes that we made last night? So being able to have that image of just, you know, as soon as we have something, just get it out to production. But of course, you'll need some, you know, automated tests and whatnot. So what did we do? We actually had a BHAG, which is a big, hairy, audacious goal. So something a little crazy, a little over the top. And ours was to bring to production 15 minutes after a developer or the development was done. So I know, pretty crazy, right? But all the ideas that we would try and come up, example, you know, we can't deploy after 4 o'clock. We were like, well, does that go against our BHAG or is it going for our BHAG? So it was always helping us. This was like our target for our decision making and whatnot. And our gamble was actually successful. We would end up deploying 80 to 90 times a sprint. Our best sprint even went up to 150. And the most important part was we went from 3 weeks that it would take us to deliver something in production to 33 minutes. So I didn't get to see the 15 minutes, but we did get to shave off, you know, a good chunk of time from the 3 weeks to the 33 minutes. Sorry about that. 33 minutes to get something out to production. And then, of course, before we start jumping into the metrics, let's talk about measuring a little bit, right? So metrics are numbers that portray information about a process under question. It can show the accurate measurements about how a process is functioning and provide that baseline where you'll be able to suggest some improvements. So what's the objective really of measuring is to allow the teams to see where the improvements and the efforts need to be put in to be able to optimize our delivery process and, of course, have all that quality in. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Just remember that. It's that whole build, measure, learn feedback loop, right? So no matter the role that you're playing on an agile team, you should strive to bring facts and information to your teams. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the whole point is to be able to provoke discussions in order to optimize your processes. Of course, if we're talking numbers, we're talking danger. You've probably already gone in your head and saying, anybody can interpret numbers however we want, right? We can make them tell the story that we want them to say. And you're right about that. But you know what? Our interpretation of them will still guide us in a direction and start making start questioning our processes. So whether they be those vanity metrics, which are that game of illusion of, well, it's a low number, so good job, not necessarily. So those vanity metrics will still help you. And then, of course, there's the actionable metrics. So those are the ones that we're really going to try and strive for because they're going to give you the drive that you need for your strategy and your direction. Throughout the next little while, I'll be sharing some vanity metrics as well that we ended up using and some actionable metrics. So what exactly do we want to measure? So you see the pizza on screen, and I kind of want to give you a little pizza analogy. So often when we think about quality and measuring, we're thinking about the quality of the end product, right? So the pizza in this case, and does it have all the ingredients that the client ordered? But really what's important about the whole quality process is from the beginning to the end, right? How was it ordered? How was the order delivered to the kitchen? Did the kitchen make mistakes because they didn't understand the waiter's handwriting? Is the pizza, not the pizza, but is the kitchen working in an optimal fashion in the order that we're putting stuff on the pizza? And is the oven started and whatnot? So really, we have to stop thinking about just the end product as a QA. We really also need to be bringing to the team some statistics about, the quality of the code and the delivery cycle maturity as well. So that whole process from the time, the waiter took the order and then did the waiter get stopped as he was going to the kitchen to bring the order? Did he get stopped at 2 or 3 other tables, kind of slowing down the moment where that's in the kitchen? Should we be giving him an iPad so that it goes directly to the kitchen, the order instantaneously? There's no errors on the chicken scratch that maybe we're not understanding what the waiter wrote. So all that stuff also needs to be measured. And then, of course, yes, the product quality in the end, the pizza itself, does it have all the ingredients and whatnot? So that's kind of how I'm going to be dividing some of the statistics and some of the metrics that we used throughout these three sections. So many teams, as I mentioned, are still kind of waterfalling it throughout the CI/CD and kind of just gating quality at one specific moment. But really what needs to be going on CI/CD is just testing at every one of those phases. So if you remember, I was talking to you about that quality, that continuous assurance, and that's kind of what we tried to put in place, was something at every step of the way. So let's get started with the code quality. So that's a little bit more at the beginning of that loop, right? So at the moment where we're coding and where we're merging and doing our pull requests. So of course, one of the first things I'll bring up is unit tests, which are always attributed to the dev responsibility. And often as QAs, we kind of, don't exactly know what's going on there. What we did was actually have a huge interest within the unit tests. And this is what we ended up discovering. So by bringing up the code coverage, it helped us in many ways. The first thing we did was demonstrate which microservices had no or had minimal coverage. And then we were able to decide on a strategy that needed to be put in place according to the number of calls and the criticality of the microservice or the API itself. Then, of course, adding those unit tests to the code, adding that coverage helped the developer have more confidence in what he was delivering. Sometimes, the developer will go in a, they call it the spaghetti code, and then they'll just kind of want to refactor everything because they're not too sure and they're insecure that if they just make that small little change on that, if, they're not too sure what's going on, and they prefer to rewrite it. But having those tests in just gave the dev confidence of saying, hey, you know what, let me just try this modification. I think this is where it's going. The tests will help me to tell me what's going on afterwards. So that was really cool. And then, as I mentioned, we were also doing 3 Amigo sessions to discover the test cases ahead of time, right? So before the developer would start developing the functionality, we would actually sit together and we would look at the, let's say, 10 test cases that we said we would need for those. And we would decide together which ones would be automated, and especially which ones would be automated at the unit test level. So what was fabulous is, oddly enough, the QAs discovered that a lot of the tests were being written earlier on, and it made them be able to save time on some of the manual tests that they were doing, therefore upping their confidence on certain portions that they were actually still testing manually. So we came and shaved off a few seconds there. And also just that those saved up minutes gave the QA the possibility of doing more exploratory testing and digging elsewhere in the product. So those were some positive things. So how did we do that? We actually used Sonar Cloud or Sonar Cube, that's also available out there. So for each of the APIs, we were able to have some statistics early on, and already the tool is giving you best practices, kind of helping the developer make sure that he's coding in optimal ways as well. And so you also notice that besides the percentage, so on this image, it's at 92.1% the unit test coverage. It will also be able to tell you guys if there's bugs, vulnerabilities within the code. So already, instead of finding some things later on in your QA environment, once it's been deployed, well, we were finding things earlier on in the process. So that was awesome, helping us getting confident earlier on. So as I mentioned, the percentage of unit test coverage, we would just be able to jot those down, kind of notice which APIs didn't have coverage or minimal, and we would strike out some strategies around that. And then, of course, as well, within the code quality, we were able to get some visibility on some accessibility, some performance, and some SEO practices. So again, if I take performance, for example, or even accessibility, we'll be testing those either in the QA environment or in a pre-prod environment, especially for performance. But what's super interesting is we used a tool really early on, again, before the pull request. And we were even able to integrate it within the CI/CD process. So this tool is super simple. It's actually Google Lighthouse. I don't know if many of you are aware of this, but at the same place where you're probably using the inspect on Google Chrome, if you navigate through the other tabs, there's another tab that's called Google Lighthouse. And what this does is within 30 seconds to a minute, it will give you a report that will look something like this on the performance of your page. So it's on the compiled code, but it'll give you an idea of the performance of the page, the accessibility, the best practices, and it will give you for each of the sections. So if we go into performance, it will give you a little section that you can explode and will guide you through some of the corrections that need to be done. So again, like, how awesome is it to not be finding these things last minute when your developer's already moved on to his third story before you had time to come and test this particular functionality. So to be able to give these tools earlier on is awesome from a quality perspective. And for the developers, it's really great for them, for their confidence early on. And then the last portion that we put in place for the code quality was the defect escape rate. So these are the bugs that were found once they've left the developer's environment and went on to either QA or UAT or even off to production, right? So this metric was just in place to help us notice patterns that we had. And what were some of the patterns that we noticed was, okay, this bug, we ended up finding it in UAT. It was a wrong comprehension. How can we improve ourselves from that point of view? Or, oh, we noticed this only once in the QA environment because the data is better in that environment. Is there a way of bringing that information or those data onto the local environment and being able to detecting those issues even earlier on? So we were always kind of questioning ourselves, thanks to having these numbers in front of us. So what was super interesting is just with this defect escape rate and continuously, questioning ourselves and what am I still testing in QA and why do I need this isolated environment? With time, actually within the second year, we had eliminated the QA environment. And we were actually on our way to eliminating the UAT environments. We were actually going from local to an integration environment to canary deployments and off to production. So that was really awesome to have seen that, kind of shrink that whole process in the kitchen, right? So again, optimizing, how we're making that pizza. We kept questioning ourselves thanks to these numbers that we were able to bring to the team and just have these opportunities to be able to inspect and adapt, right? So then the second portion I was talking to you about earlier was the whole delivery cycle, right? So that whole loop. So now we're a little bit elsewhere. We're at the moment where we've done the build, we're on our way to releasing it, and we're actually deploying it to production. So what's our cruising speed? This is kind of what we want to be analyzing, and what obstacles are slowing us down. So we continually questioned ourselves, again, with that BHAG in mind of, hey, how can we get this out to production in 15 minutes? So the end of the sprint measurement that we used was the story rejection rate. So how many reworks and back and forth a story had, and what were the reasons for it? So again, what we would notice is back and forth. Why were we having them? Oh, I thought, this was what it was supposed to do, and I thought this is how the functionality was supposed to be reacting. So what we ended up noticing is maybe we should speak ahead of time, which is where we put in place 3 amigos, right? Of just teaming up ahead of time, discussing each of our perspectives on what we thought was going to have to be done, with some example mapping sessions and whatnot. And so we would see our story rejection rate reduce, right? We weren't rejecting stories as often anymore. And then what was super interesting at the end of it all is, while all of that was super successful, we still had developers that were insecure and that were asking the QAs on the team, hey, can you still test my things? I developed it. It's not a good idea that I test it and whatnot. All we did was use an Excel spreadsheet, listed the 15 tickets that we had taken during the sprint. And for each of the tickets, every time a developer asked us to test, we jotted down what we found as bugs and how many minutes we spent testing on them. And what was awesome is we were able to bring back at the next retro of the team of saying, guys, we don't need to rely on QA testing as much because our 3 amigos are bringing success. And how did we notice, and how we were able to communicate that to the teams was with that Excel spreadsheet. So on those 15 stories that we had, 12 of them, we actually found nothing, no issues whatsoever. So we could have shaved off, an hour, 2 hours, and just have brought that value out to production. And then, of course, the 3 leftover stories, we only found minimal issues. And I mean, if you think about it, and again, this was the media business, maybe medical and military is a whole other issue. But if you think about it, how many of you are giving a report just before you're going out to prod and saying, hey, I think we can go out to prod. Sure, there's still these 20 bugs, but they're very minimal and we can correct them afterwards. So really, we were just taking that hypothesis and saying, instead of knowing which issues we have, we're confident that we've tested the important parts of a functionality. So if there are small bugs, it's okay. We'll find them once we start doing exploratory testing in production. But at least the client will have, the new functionality in their hands, and we'll be able to get some feedback on that as well, instead of just waiting on perfection and getting stuff out later on. So story rejection was really awesome to help us, again, just to question ourselves and just get ideas with the team. Then another metric that we used was the number of deployments, right? We wanted to see how many times did that Zodiac cross that lake, right? And we wanted to test, we wanted to see how many failures we had in that. So all we had was super simple. We were using New Relic. So we created a dashboard with the help of some DevOps, which simply displayed, how many deployments happened in each of our environments. And then we were able to question, so how did I get 146 deployments in UAT? How come I don't have 146 out to production? What am I finding? Is it my tests that are finding stuff at this point? Can I move some of those tests earlier on instead of finding them in UAT? Often some of the discussions that came up was around data. And so we were able to question again and say, how do I get that data more precise earlier on so that I can be detecting all of these issues from the get-go? So again, just small improvements that we were able to do. Another thing that we noticed was some of the failures that were happening between development to UAT was Jenkins was crashing every 3 or 4 pull requests. And so, but it had become kind of the status quo for the team. It's like, yeah, we know. And it's like, no, that's not tolerable. We need to improve our whole cycle and whatnot. And so got the DevOps team to correct what was going on with Jenkins, and then everything was more smooth. We had better tools for ourselves internally to be able to go out to production. Then we used the change failure rate statistic. So this one is super interesting as it captures the percentage of changes that were made to code and that resulted in an incident, a rollback, or any type of production failure. So here the textbook Google calculation is number of incidents divided by the total number of deployments. We didn't even get to that specific statistic, but here's what we were using that was kind of similar to a change failure rate. So we were following statistics on the incidents that were happening on our project, on our product. So for every sprint, we were taking out the metrics on each important issue that was going on. So a P1 was, fire, all hands on deck. We need this fixed ASAP. We're looking bad. P2, important issue to get corrected. And a P3, usually, one of those aesthetic, wrong colors, wrong alignment or issue. So of course, having these was awesome because just being able to say, hey, we went from, 6 major issues to 2 major issues the next sprint was like, cool, whatever we analyzed in those 6 issues, we put in place some new practices or some new ways of doing things. Well, it seems to have helped us because now we're out to 2. And just being able to analyze, what were those 6 about and how can we improve? Some of the analysis and the outcomes out of that was we put in place some canary deployments. So that's kind of releasing at a small percentage every X amount of minutes out to production and kind of gauging, is there an issue on performance? Are there bugs coming in? Are we getting called and customer service or whatnot? And we also put in some A/B testing so that we can compare behaviors and see how the product was being appreciated or not. Of course, I'm hearing you. This is what I now consider a vanity metric because we can have the numbers kind of tell us whatever we want. Because I'm sure you're saying, yeah, but Julie, if on sprint 32, you're not releasing super important functionality, it's something smaller, maybe that's why you only have 2 issues. And, the previous sprint was like big important stuff. And that's why we have a little bit more. And you're probably right. But you know what? No matter what, the information did help us to put in place some stuff, to put in place some new things. So again, just bring some numbers, even if they're not perfect, right? But as we used those numbers, well, people started questioning, and then we started elaborating and again, inspecting and adapting. And this kind of became my favorite one. So let's take those same numbers, but now add a time of impact. So let's go back to those 6 issues that we had where we were kind of sad, right? Because we had 6 instead of the 2, but those 6 only impacted the client for 2 hours. While the 2 major issues that we had the next sprint may have had created a downtime of 15 hours on your product that your clients weren't able to use it. So you see how that changes our perspective now and gives us a better direction on where to put our priorities, where to analyze, and whatnot. So again, I know sometimes we're perfectionists and we want to make sure that we have the perfect numbers, the perfect metrics and stats. We don't want to be questioned, and we want to make sure that everything's okay. Don't wait. Just put a number out there, start creating discussions with your teams, and then just start growing from there and just improving the numbers as the questions come about. So I think that's super important to get through. So if you were following, just adding that dimension of how long did we impact the product, well, that's known as the mean time to recover, right? So how long does it take us to get the system back up and running? And again, precious information came to us through just this one metric that we were able to bring to our incident meeting. So the first portion of it is the reaction time. Could there have been alerts and monitoring to help us be aware before that first customer call, right? How long did it take us to start being on that call? Could customer success have been quicker on the diagnosis of the issue before sending it to the IT team? Could we be training the customer success team better once we're deploying functionalities? Is there back and forth? Here I'm thinking, so often on mobile apps, we'll get the issue at the IT level, and then we'll be like, well, was the person, on landscape or portrait, and were they on Wi-Fi or 5G? And then there's all this back and forth, and then waiting for the client to get back to us and whatnot. So could we improve our checklists for customer success, customer service? So a lot of precious information can be caught on. What was the reaction time? How long did it take you to jump on the issue, right? And then the second portion to this is, how easy was it to find that line of code that created the issue, right? How long did it take? What we ended up realizing in time was we weren't deploying frequently enough. So we were actually deploying huge chunks of code, which was taking us a lot of time to be able to find that needle in the haystack and then to start getting, all the action going on correcting it. So the teams consciously made a decision and say, hey, how can we improve and deliver quicker, smaller chunks, which will make us be more reactive when an issue does come up in production. And then the last portion of that mean time to recover really is redeploying that correction. So we have the correction now, and how long did it take to redeploy it? So what we ended up noticing was we were really proud to have, a whole bunch of automated tests that would just test everything for us. But every time we had a new functionality, we would keep increasing the time that those automated tests would run. So actually we were kind of, shooting ourselves in the foot at one point of trying to redeploy things quicker. We were ending up realizing, hey, we need to put about a new strategy for that test automation. And I'll be sharing a little bit of that in the next upcoming slides. So again, just a whole bunch of questions, just these little numbers, right? How long did it take? Well, how could we have been quicker? Just helping us to shave off seconds and eventually minutes. And like I said, if you recall, we went from 3 weeks to deliver something to taking 33 minutes to getting out there. But it's a process of 2 years of just, inspect and adapt and measuring and bringing up numbers, and then just, having the team kind of brainstorm on them. And what's super interesting is often as a QA, you might live the frustration of knowing what needs to be put in place. So for example, at the last project I was on, I knew we needed a bug triage, and just the teams were just overloaded on all of their work. And they're like, I know, Julie, it's a really great idea, but we're so busy and we don't have time and we can't do it. And you're just asking too much. So oddly enough, all I did was put in place an incident management meeting where I would just bring up these stats. Hey, here's where we're at. Here's what's going on. And then, of course, just all these questions, even from the teams, the POs, the Scrum Masters, the developers, everybody was just like, okay, but what happened and how? Oh, and we could have put that in place. And it was like, well, that's a great idea. So now the ideas were coming from the team, and they wanted to put in place. So I'm thinking some of these metrics could actually help you as you position yourself in the team to kind of get what you want, to be confident and, you know, have the team deploy and barely need you on the team as well, that they have so much confidence. So of course, all of these metrics that I've been sharing are no secret. It's the DORA metrics that are known through the DevOps world. So don't hesitate to look those up. And as I move on with them as well, there is the lead time to change, or the cycle time. This is another metric that we used, and this is the amount of time that it takes from a commit to get into production, or from the backlog to getting out to production as well. So this was kind of simple. We actually used a chart in Jira. So if you're using Jira, there's control chart, and I believe now that they actually have a cycle time report as well. So this was super interesting. What we can see is it will plot on the chart on the amount of days that it's taking us. So the two green dots are indicating that it took us over 20 days to be able to get those stories out. So what was interesting is we would team up as the quality team. We would team up with the Scrum Masters and say, hey, next retro, I'd really love to dig into those two stories and see what we can come up with the team. So again, just provoking discussions. Hey, metric, 20 days to get this one out while we have, you know, a 2-week sprint. What happened, you know, and whatnot. Things we discovered as simple as, you know, a PR would wait for a code review for hours and unfortunately sometimes days. So just the teams taking decisions of improving. How can we be more reactive on getting those things out? So again, super interesting information that came out of that. Or sometimes, of course, what would come out was the story was bigger than anticipated. So as I mentioned, that's where we started diving into those 3 amigos and those example mapping sessions. And then the last portion of this is, of course, all about the automation, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier. I mean, you can't go quickly if you don't have automated tests. So of course you need those. I once remember reading this article that was comparing automated tests to brakes on a car. So you'll allow yourself to go really fast on the highway because you know you have those brakes that will come in handy in case. If not sure you would want to be, you know, going as fast as you do on the highway. So automation is kind of the same way. So what we did was we would actually take the time that it would take us to execute that suite, right? So as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, it was actually going against our dream of, you know, delivering within 15 minutes because we were just growing that suite of automated tests. So when we noticed that, we took 2 actions. The first one was actually kind of reviewing all the automated tests and saying which ones would be, you know, all hands on deck, there's a fire if there was an issue in production. So reclassifying them with those P1, P2, P3s that I was mentioning a little bit earlier. And so what we did was just keep the P1s and the P2s within the pipeline. And the other tests, we would actually run them as soon as we would deploy out to production. So we would kind of like your reports where, you know, those minor issues that we're finding, but we're still saying, hey, let's still go out to prod. Well, it was the same thing. The automated tests were finding them right after, and we were correcting them. But again, we were having super confidence on the major issues weren't going to be happening because those are in our pipeline on those. Actually, the second idea I will share on the next slide. And then another thing that we did do was count the number of automated tests and the depth that we had. So we did have, we did tell on the project, we had a strategy where developers needed to deploy all of their automated tests as they deployed the story, right? So technically we weren't supposed to have that many deaths, but we did have a history before we did automation. But now we had a debt, I'll say 3,000 tests. Where to begin? Where to begin correcting these and whatnot. So again, we used the same strategy. We reviewed all the depth that we had, and we applied the P1, P2, P3 strategy to them. And so from there, from the 3,000 test cases, we were able to say that maybe we had 80 P1 You know, and all the P3s, we would say like, you know what, those we can handle. We can afford to have those small issues. We'll just wait to have an incident. And then once we correct the issue, we'll deliver the test at that moment. So just having those numbers again helped us bring about a new strategy of how do we attack that debt that was like 3,000 tests, where to begin. So that was super interesting. And of course, the other point that I wanted to mention was the testing pyramid, right? So just we ended up noticing that we had a lot of end-to-end tests. We tried to put a number on each of those levels of the pyramid just to see did we look like an hourglass? Were we the inverted pyramid? And what we ended up noticing is we did have a lot of end-to-end, and we ended up being able to bring some of those to a lower level of testing, which helped us go quicker and have confidence earlier on. So we were finding the issues very early, before even doing the build. So that was great for the developers. So the developers are not always now in correction mode. They're able to move on to their next functionality and develop, instead of always coming back because we're coming back to their desks and saying, hey, found this. We were always trying to just find things earlier on. So as there are 3 minutes left, I will just whiz through the last section, which is the product quality itself. So now it's in production. We need to monitor and operate. And there's a whole bunch of angles to this. There's building the thing right? So as requested by the stakeholders, and then building it the right way. Do we have the right infrastructure, the right technologies that we're using? Are our choices the good one? And building the right thing. Is the end user, happy with the end result? So quickly, things like, traceability matrix were things that were being used. Is it as expected by the end user? Talked a lot about the incident management, but there's also things like, those app store scores and reviews that we were bringing to meetings to provoke discussions as well. We also had a subscription, so we would look at user abandonment, subscription cancellations. Of course, probably, again, a vanity metric here, but we were able to put in place, it would be interesting to have a survey that we send out to those who cancel, so that we can dig and get more details, so that we can see where we need to improve on our product. And then the last portion was simply, do we have the right technologies? Do we have the right infrastructure solution? So just things like, using Firebase Crashlytics to be able to see the crashes that were going on our apps, having those monitoring, those number of alerts, following that app dex and the scaling of the pods and whatnot, all information that you can question or ask about and see how the other teams are looking to improve all the process. So there you have it. I hope this inspires you to take the plunge into the next phase towards your continuous delivery with quality, and that you will go out there and have your own BHAG and enjoy the rest of the conferences. I'm sorry I had so much information and didn't have time to follow the chat and the questions, but don't hesitate to reach out to me either through the Zentelio website or through LinkedIn. It'll be my pleasure. So thanks, and enjoy the rest of the conferences.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's actually inspiring, a really awesome presentation. I really have a question here from Omeno. She asks, what advice do you have for teams looking to strike a balance between speed and quality in their delivery cycles?
I'm sorry, that kind of cut off. What balance?
What advice do you have for teams looking to strike a balance between speed and quality in their delivery cycles?
So I'd say one of the first things, of course, is probably getting some now what's the word in English there? I had happen one time. A company policy on quality, right? So what's the degree of risk that we're willing to take on a product? Because if you want to go fast, you'll have to cut some corners. So like I said, we were taking some test cases and kind of measuring them against, if it was an incident, if it was a major one, okay, those we really don't want to have, we couldn't tolerate those, but we were able to tolerate smaller incidents. So I think having that agreement with upper management and having that company policy on, where's that line between how fast we can go and what you're willing to tolerate as, reputation on your company or whatnot. So I think that would be a great start there. And then again, I think just using some of those metrics to get dialogue going, and then you'll start seeing who's afraid of what and how much you can push that limit. So hoping that answered the question.
Yes, it's actually clear. Another question from Omar is asking, for those new to Matrix, where should they begin in order to quickly see value in their continuous delivery process?
That are new to Matrix?
Yes, it's asking.
Okay, not sure I'm understanding the question.
Anyways, I mean,
write to me, and it'll be my pleasure to try and dig that out. And maybe if we have a super interesting answer that we should share with everybody, I'll share it with you guys as well.
I'll write it in the chat anyways. Here it goes.
Where should they begin in order to quickly see value in their continuous delivery process? So the question was, for those new to metrics, where should they begin in order to quickly see the value in their continuous delivery? So thanks for that. I wasn't understanding. I was hearing matrix instead of metrics. So sorry about that. That was my confusion. I don't know. I think my first important success came really with those mean time to recover, right? So it's like, no project is perfect. There's always going to be bugs, right? So just do that reverse engineering, right? Get those metrics on how many incidents, and then start digging. How long did we impact the client? Was it us that impacted the client, or was it a vendor service of ours? That's already another important information to be digging around. Sometimes we're like, oh, it crashed again, but you know what? It's not us. Or is there another way of backing ourselves from just having that one vendor or whatnot? So I don't know. I think I would always get a lot of success out of that mean time to recover, and just analyzing, how long did it take you to react, and how long did it take you to correct, and how long did it take you to get that correction out? And then no matter what you're going to be discovering there, you're going to be implementing, and it's going to have a great impact on the next functionalities that you're going to be getting out to production, right? And then, with time, you're going to grow that quality, whatnot. So I don't know, that I'd say start there, or start small within your team. Team up with your Scrum Master, be very, very close to them, and they'll help you, right? I mean, a Scrum Master's job is to see the team, work as optimal as possible. And so if you're able to, bring him some numbers that say, hey, it would be interesting to dig around, just maybe that control chart that I was showing, saying, hey, these stories took us, 12 days to get out, or 3 weeks, or a month to get out. What happened? Where did we struggle? Oh yeah, well, you know what? We took the story, but the client, didn't even know where he was going with it. Okay, why did we commit to that story? Question ourselves, right? So I don't know. Those are the first ideas, or maybe my